If I said to you journalism, Wilfred, Agony, and Squinters, what would you say all those things have in common? The answer in just a moment. Writer, producer, performer, Adam Zwar.
I'll be good to see you again, mate.
Thank you. And likewise, you're looking very well.
Yeah. Well, we started on the Wedge together, didn't we?
I think so. I think that's where we met.
And I remember you coming into the studio and Michael Horrocks saying, "We've got a new arbiter of taste," and it was you.
And you had didn't last very long.
Well, no one did, but you sat in a darkened room for about 100 hours going through every sketch that we shot in like 2 years and ranking them. I remember that.
I must have been the most hated man.
No, not at all, Luke. But we're probably all trying to suck up to you.
You know, the funny thing was that I was gone and it was all recut back to what it was.
Oh, wow. That's hilarious. There were a lot of chefs in that kitchen.
There were indeed, and we'll get to that in actual fact. So I'll ask you the obligatory question to start with. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Cairns. My parents my dad was a journalist and an author who was working in London, and he was sent by the Times in London. He and Mum were both Aussies, and they met in London. Mum was an interior designer, and Dad was a journalist. So that was my life growing up in Cairns, and then once I went to high school, I went to boarding school and went to Brisbane Grammar, which was interesting for so many reasons. But I had to. I might sound like I've got a heavy Australian accent right now, but my accent was off the charts Australian before I went to Brisbane Grammar. So yeah, it was very nasally, North Queensland nasal kind of twang, and they quickly whipped that out of me. You know, I was invited back to talk to the kids at the school, and probably 8 years ago now, and there's a framed cabinet in the headmaster's office, and that's and it's the cane that was last used in 1989. That was my final year at Brisbane Grammar. Probably on me, Albie.
Has it got your imprint on it?
It would have my DNA on it in some way.
And you mentioned your mum was an interior designer. She also wrote for House and Garden, did she not?
Yeah. So once she met Dad, he said, "Well, why don't you?" I don't know how the conversation went, but maybe that was the idea was put into her head that maybe she could make a living writing about this stuff. And especially when we moved to Cairns, because there wasn't a House and Garden correspondent up there. And so she put her hand up, and then she was a House and Garden and Gourmet Traveller. And, there were always chefs and designers and actors and singers at our place. And much to Dad's chagrin, really, because I think he just wanted a quiet life to be able to sit down and write.
Sounds very bohemian.
It was. It does sound bohemian. And I guess Mum in a way was, but Dad was pretty like a very straight conservative guy living a bohemian life.
Mm-hmm.
He was a bit of a Hemingway type. He was a man's man. He did not give a fuck what anyone thought of him. The opposite of me.
I would love to be like that.
Me too. He didn't give it a second thought.
Very embarrassing for you, no doubt, but brilliant.
So embarrassing. So embarrassing. And I'd be getting into fights at school because Dad had a column in one of the newspapers, and he had a column in the Cairns Post, and he had a column in the Courier Mail, and he would say controversial things. And I remember one kid at primary school, saying, "My dad thinks your dad's a dickhead," and me just going for it. And Dad goes, "I don't care. I don't care what they think, mate."
Yeah. As you're ripping their heads off.
I was a little outrageous redhead kid.
So you sort of took the writing from them and you did a journalism degree at the Uni of South Queensland?
I did 3 years. I did the journalism degree, and while I was doing the journalism degree, I was also doing acting units as well.
Right.
And then I got out and went straight into a cadetship at North Queensland Newspapers, which is the Kent's Post Innisfail Advocate. And I was down at the Innisfail Advocate, and that was a pretty depressing time. You were the photographer and the journalist, and you would just write, you would write the stories and take the photo. And, it was good country journalism, but I didn't know anyone in Innisfail. And in those days, Innisfail was a really sleepy tobacco town. But I remember Dad came down to visit me once, and he saw a bunch of Italian guys on the side of the road. Because it was an Italian cane farming area, like sugar cane and maybe a bit of tobacco. Actually, tobacco was more Mariba, but no, it was sugar cane. And Dad asked these Italians, where do you get the best coffee in town? Because Dad was a big coffee guy. And it started a brawl.
Wow.
Like that was it. This is like 1993, 94. And these guys all disagreed on where you could get the best coffee in town. All these hardcore Italian cane farmers. And then I moved to the Sunday Telegraph Brisbane edition, which was great. I was the rugby league reporter. And then a bit of time at the Sunday Mail in Brisbane, and then went to the Sunday Herald Sun, which I spent, all up, I would have spent about 8 years there. And that was probably the happiest years of my life, So
really,
I mean, it was the last days where you actually got paid decently to, as a freelance journalist, because I was on a contract. I would write because I could do my auditions at the same time. That I didn't have to clock in and clock off. Because I still harbored the acting dream, and but just quietly I did that. So I got an agent, and I would do auditions, and I would turn up on Blue Heelers and Neighbours and Sea Change and.
Yes, you did all the right.
I wasn't really troubling the scorers though in any big way, but at the same time I was living this other life, which was fantastic. I'd be going around the world interviewing rock stars, and
well, in one of your books you talk about hang out with AC/DC.
Yeah. So I was went to Stuttgart and spent a week in a hotel with AC/DC, and went and saw him play twice. We went and saw Deep Purple with the Stuttgart Philharmonic Orchestra, and it was all that 1 week was just so rock and roll heavy. Spent a lot of time with Brian Johnson, and he was. The Young Brothers were fine, but Brian was really. There was this other Australian journalist called Angus Fontaine, who's done a lot of great stuff. And we hung out with Brian for the whole week, and we went. I remember us going out late one night, because Brian was looking for this potion called Singer's Secret, because he was losing his voice.
Right.
And we went on the outskirts of Stuttgart in what was the German equivalent of a Tarago at the time. I stayed in the van as he and the driver went into this. You call it they called it a pharmacy, but it had meat hanging down from the wall. That's where I remember, and him coming out with his potion, and he got in the car. Cut to the next morning at breakfast. I said, "How did this thing a secret go for you, Brian?" He goes, "Did fuck all for my voice, but you should see the size of my cock."
Well, I think you saying potion was a giveaway.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, I had a good time, and then I, obviously, thanks to the wage at the Herald Sun, I was able to make enough money to fund short films, and I just did one after another, and finally got one that worked, and that was Wilfred, and I was able to kind of segue out of that, got enough buzz that I was able to segue out of journalism and into show business.
Right. Well, can I take you back a tiny bit?
Yeah.
With Wilfred, because you did theatre and commercials at that time. Can I talk about the commercial that you probably still get shit for to this day, 3 for Free?
Well, there was not many people. The thing about 3 for Free is as soon as you leave Victoria, no one knows about it.
Right.
Because HBA was a Victorian thing, but it was nuts in Victoria. It wasn't respectful fame, like, you know, in the sense that someone on television who was in a soap or a drama might get, you know, it was freak show fame.
Yes. Well, I do have some memory of being at a pub or a dinner with you and people approaching you about it, and it would have been 10 years later.
Yeah, they just really loved it in that sense, and you kind of had to go with it. But it was like it got very annoying. People were leaving cakes and cookies in my door. I mean, it got out where I lived, and there'd be notes from people saying, "I just want to take care of you," and basically it was an ad. I had to wear these fake buck teeth, and I go in there and I say, the deal was you get 3 months. If you sign up to HBA, you get 3 months for free. And I say, can I have 3 for free? Because I can't pronounce 3. And she goes, free for what? You know, anyway, it was confusing. And everyone he was kind of a bit of an endearing character, and he had buck teeth. And
he was very endearing, and it was fortuitous for you as well because you met director Tony Rogers and your co-star Cindy Waddingham on that set.
Yeah, I did, and a bunch of the crew came along for the short film. So it was literally, so Jason Gann and I had written a film, and where Jason was going to play a rock star. Jason got a job on a no-budget feature where playing a young Nazi youth, and had to get his hair cut, and so basically that ensured that we weren't able to make the rock star thing because the haircut was just, I mean, Jason would tell you this, it was abominable. So we had to come up with another idea, and I'd gone on a date with a woman, and she had a dog that didn't like me, and the dog came on the bed and everything when we're, you know, fooling around. And so the next day I went, Jason was staying at my place, and I just told him the story, and suddenly, you know, we improvised the short film and wrote it down. And I'd already told all these people who I'd met on the 3 for Free ad, like the crew, the DOP and a bunch of the crew and Tony. I said, I've got this, you know, it's a film about a rock star and everything. So then I had to ring them up and say, forget the rock star thing. It's a film about a talking dog. And they're like, okay, we kind of like the rock star idea. Anyway, they kind of went along for the ride, and we shot it, got into Trop Fest. And it was after that I was able to slowly kind of move out of journal. I was able to make money with voiceovers and ads, as you say, and you know, other roles and things like that.
Well, we still hear your voice on ads today.
Yeah, not as much.
Probably not Sam Johnson much, but a lot.
No. Yeah. God, he was around. Like, I mean, he was the king of voiceovers, but I was kind of, you know, I was up there, and then I remember we had to do a voiceover together once, and him just meeting me outside the studio and saying, I knew this day would come. And
so it was a duel of the voices.
Yeah, that's right. It's I don't know if you remember that 30 Rock scene between Alec Baldwin and Will Arnett, and then they're both saying, my voice is lower than your voice. You know, it's the battle of the voices.
I'm Batman.
That's what it was like in MEAA meetings when they're talking about rates for voiceover artists. You get all these. If you shut your eyes, you knew who it was. You know, Angus Sampson, Nissan Navara, Sam Johnson, and it was flame grilled beef burger.
Yeah,
burgers are better than Hungry Jack's. I could tell. I used to be able to tell every voiceover artist at the time. I mean, you go in and out of fashion as a voiceover person.
Mm-hmm. You find that?
Definitely. We can go through my career and you think that it's going to be linear, but it's not linear. You do in our business, unless you're completely behind the camera, you go in and out of fashion.
I think
you just got to hang in there.
Yeah. And it's absolutely, like you say, it's not linear. You think it's going to be linear, but it's not.
No, you think, oh, this is the wage I've been, this is what I expect to earn, and next year I might even earn a little bit more. No, next year you earn 50 grand less.
Yeah, that's right. With Wilfred, obviously it won a ton of awards, a short film. And how did that translate to the SBS series?
So we part of those awards were a lot of in-kind prizes like free editing time, free film stock, right, things like that. And so we pulled all that together and made a pilot. But no one gave a shit about it. We sent it around, no one gave a shit about it. And then Comedy Channel said, look, if you want to write some scripts on spec, if we like them, we'll pay for them. And Jason and I wrote the whole series on spec. And just as we're finishing episode, I think halfway through episode 7 out of 8, they rang up and said, listen, we're no longer interested. We're going in a different direction. And so, yeah. And so we then sent it to SBS, who'd already passed on it. But it was the production company we were working with was Renegade Films, and they were in negotiations to sell Rock Quiz. And then they said, oh, by the way, Jason and Adam have written the whole series of Wilfred. Do you want to have a look at the scripts? And on that day, they sold Rock Quiz and Wilfred. So it was basically do the pilot, then write the scripts on spec, then the series got up. And then they didn't want it because, nothing rated on SBS. And the overnights were a big thing in those days. And the demographics were all kind of geared towards commercial TV. And then they were pretty much like, well, it's like a one and done. And then the DVD sales just went berserk.
Right.
And that's what got us all the tradies and potheads buying DVDs. Wilfred DVDs got us a second season.
Actually, it's just come on to binge, I think, in the last few weeks.
Yeah. So it's, you kind of look, I actually tweeted something the other day saying, I wish if I'd known I'd be playing this long, I would have eaten a lot less cookies in between setups.
The premise was pretty much like your date, except, Adam sees him as a guy in a dog suit and everyone else sees him as a dog. Is that right?
Yeah. So it's basically, it was just a kind of about Adam's paranoia. But also in a way, I mean, I don't want to explain it too much because it takes the funny out of it, but in a way it's how much value she puts in the dog, into, how much value she, gives to the dog.
Yes.
And so Adam sees him through her eyes in a way, because she loves the dog so much, and so it manifests as a human. The American version did a whole kind of a mental health thing. They came and asked, the original interest was around season 2, and in those days it was just when comedy decided to be serious. Remember when they said, let's not be funny anymore. Let's be serious. Let's make it straight.
Yeah. And you don't need jokes.
No, you don't need jokes. And so it became a big kind of earnest mental health kind of meditation on mental health and everything. And it was like every episode had an earnest kind of quote about mental health and things like that. And Ryan was paranoid, and it became a bit Fight Club-ish, and it's, is he real? Isn't he real?
Yes. And Elijah Wood was playing your character.
Yeah. So Elijah Wood was mad, and there was no conflict between Elijah Wood and Jason. They were just best friends. It was a buddy comedy, whereas ours was the dark. I mean, Americans are shocked when they see the original because obviously the swearing, but but more than that, just the darkness, which is probably a manifestation of Jason and my relationship at the time, because we were stuck together. So, we did, before I met you, we had done plays, short films. Then we did 52 episodes of The Wedge, which you were involved in. We did 2 seasons of Wilfred. We did a feature film called Rats and Cats.
Yes, I mean, I'll get to that.
Yeah, I mean, we'd worked so much together. And so by the time we're shooting seasons of Wilfred, I dare say that he was sick at the sight of me. Our Wilfred was very conflict based, and
well, what was your involvement in the American one?
Just as a creator, so right. I'd get sent scripts just as a kind of contractual thing, and that was it. Because at that stage, I was already in Hawaii Films Land, doing Lowdown and the Agony series. It all worked out, Albie. It all worked out fine.
Sure did.
Yeah, I mean, I was happy that Jason was able to do it, and and I was, and I was happy that I was where I was.
Yes, and he kept his Australian accent, which was sort of unique back then.
I know. Yeah, based on the fact that all the dogs are Australian, something like that. I think that's how we sold it.
Right. Well, you mentioned that the Australian version of Wilfred was quite sharp, I guess you'd say. Here's a loaded question. Could you make that show today?
No. Well, no. I think it's very much generational. I think that we're showing a relationship between two men from our generation, and I think that people were meaner to each other back then. I think that was the thing. I mean, if you look at just a segue, or a sidebar. So we Amanda and I started watching every episode of Would I Lie to You from the very beginning.
Yes.
And if you look at early 2000s comedy, it was mean. People were mean to each other, and that doesn't really happen anymore. So that meanness couldn't be there, which I'd be relieved for, to be honest, because I was the brunt. I mean, it was always hard for me, after a season of Wilfred to kind of find myself again, because I was just like this fall guy. You couldn't do that. You couldn't really just have two straight white male guys, a writing team with just two straight white male guys. I mean, it was, and the female character was just very underdeveloped, I've got to say. She was, which it did back in those days. It was just, I mean, if you look, there's so much comedy that we all made back then that you kind of look at now.
Absolutely. I look back at the comedy I made, and it just, I believe none of it could be made today.
No, it's like, so what we were working on is the premise that she would have to make Adam's life as bad as possible. How do you make Adam's life as bad as possible? Well, you fuck around with his mates and you make him jealous and you give him shit and everything like that. And that was her character. She didn't have it, she didn't have another world going on. So, you couldn't do that today.
No.
But she was, I mean, it was funny. But that was, it wouldn't have existed in another, if there wasn't a man in a dog suit. You couldn't have really got away.
Well, there's a lot to be proud of. I mean, I've come to the conclusion that you have to look at these things with the lens of the time that it was made. Look at Benny Hill, look at anything. Times change.
Yeah, I mean, because Amanda and I, after the Wilfred finished, we went straight into doing Lowdown, which is based on my time as a journalist.
A lot of your knowledge in there.
Yeah. I mean, Amanda's tone and sense of humor and my kind of understanding of journalism practice, that was a big leap for me then to get away, to shake Wilfred comedically and to do something that wasn't so masculine.
Yes.
Wilfred was quite abrasive in its humor, whereas Lowdown was a lot sweeter, and also had, it also had female characters who were fully realized. So
yes,
yeah,
well, you mentioned Amanda actually, and just for anyone who doesn't know, she's an amazing writer and director.
Yeah, she's just directed some Doctor Who episodes, which the Lux and the Well. But even so, like, you want to send these episodes because there's a lot of stuff in them that we're really proud of. But there's always 2 or 3 jokes that are a bit on the nose now.
Yeah.
And
so what do you do? Do you cut them?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So it's really, it's a shame in a way that, like, which you can't, drama probably you can get away with it, but comedy you're going for jokes all the time, and those jokes aren't always going to be appropriate throughout the ages.
That's right. So Amanda, your partner, gave a new sensibility to Adam to do Lowdown. That was narrated by some guy, Jeffrey Rush. I think you might have heard of him. Produced by Nicole Minchin and directed by Amanda, and it starred you and a lot of famous and recognizable faces.
Yeah, we had every week. That was our whole thing. Every week, Alex, this journalist, would have to interview a new celebrity, and whatever article he produced, was the pressure was on him to save the paper because the paper was going under, and so he needed to do like a shock and awe story every week on some celebrity, and so we'd have these famous actors come in and play versions of, I don't know, Gordon Ramsay or Sting or John Elliott. Steve Bisley played a John Elliott composite. And Jane Harbour was in it before she, blew up. Kate Jenkinson, Carolyn O'Connor, the stage star. But every week it was kind of someone who was famous.
Yeah, and one of your cast was Sullivan Stapleton, I think.
Oh yeah, so Sullivan, I remember him playing an actor, and he worked out. He looked amazing. For the 2 weeks we were shooting, and then he goes into this room, and we just had to do one scene where he comes out of the room about 4 weeks later, and it was using a different location but coming out of the room. So he had to come back 4 weeks later, and so he walks into the room absolutely shirt off, absolutely buff, looking amazing. Comes out, just looks like he's put on 5 kilos, and just let himself go. He's been he's been partying for 4.5 weeks, which is probably what actually happened.
Coming up in part 2,
a little known actress called Rebel Wilson.
Yeah. Oh, what happened to her?
Yeah, it's a funny thing that when someone becomes really famous, when your friend of yours becomes really famous, do you keep ringing them? Or do you go, oh, you're famous now, maybe you don't want to hear from me anymore? But I went along, and that night when I came home, there was a letter from Channel 10 saying they've picked up Mr. Black.
You've been writing on Austin?
Yeah, I really love that whole experience.
I think I'm supposed to say something about like and subscribe. You know what to do. See you next time.